as a person who lives here and as a person who is deeply suspicious of large corporations, it looks like they want to take the work that this community has been doing for 40 years, the experience of 20 years, the 20-year head start that BC has, and modify the rules so they get to essentially skim off the top, and the rest of us are left sort of in the position of having to say thank you.
I like to say Bill's a skeptic and not a cynic, but at some point you say, okay.
Well, this is profound. So I'm not cynical yet, but I'm trending that way. And either you need to help me or we need to help you.
Bill, I think it really falls down to education. And I believe that the government officials that are involved in creating the regulation and creating all the legislation around the transition to cannabis really haven't been educated. And they all live in highly populated areas. Mm-hmm. And so they're seeing different things. And it would be wonderful if we could bring them out to the rural areas and share with them what our dispensaries do in the community. And I think it's really tough because there's a certain amount of media that focuses on, the pot shops and the sketchy looking places. And, there's that exists. But for the most part, I think our dispensaries, we run responsible dispensaries. We have a clientele who need medical attention. They've been through the normal process of opiates and everything else, and we have an educated population now, and they understand how those opiates affect them, and all the symptoms that they get from that, and they're sick and tired, and they want to see something different. And I think I just want to draw back to that, and I believe we really need to have a voice on product diversity, which lies with the federal government. That is something the federal government has to change for us, not that of the municipality or the province, and back fighting for that, the local growers and the craft growers that need to come into that framework. Because as it stands, if a local grower would like to have a micro license, they will then have to sell or have an agreement with a licensed producer. So in other words, that's like Overtime Beer here in Kimberley, having to sell to Labatt or to Molson's.
In order to sell to the local pub.
That's right.
Well, what nobody has said is all of a sudden everything costs 50% more.
Yes, and that's exactly right. Because basically how it works now is we order from the grower. And so we have our price per gram. And then we take our markup and sell it plus GST. So let's call it $10 plus GST per gram, which is the sort of the a good average on flour. And once we start getting all the layers filtered in, it will end up being 50% because the licensed producer will have to sell it to the distribution board. There will be an excise tax at the wholesale level. The distribution board will add their layer of cost to it, and then it'll be sold to us. We will add our layer, and then on top of it, on top of the GST that our consumers already pay, PST will be added plus another plus another excise tax. So that $10 will ultimately be a $15 per gram retail. Yeah.
Which means that there is now I'm still concerned with the gray market being converted into a black and white market. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the potential consequences of that.
Well, your concern is valid and it's real. And so if we have a client, and so let's take, for example, the cerebral palsy person that we had, or even my late husband suffering from cancer.
He's going to get the stuff somehow or other.
He's going to, yes. I mean, we did it, and we're law-abiding citizens, but when it's life or death, you find ways.
Life or death or acute suffering.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. And we have so many of us suffer from that on a daily basis. And so, yes, that's going to open up the unregulated market for sure, is the product diversity. Also the cost. And because people will pay, as long as they see value in something, people will pay a certain price. And so the value then becomes freshness, quality, and price.
Well, in addition to
So-
which, there's the third element, and I don't know much about street drugs, but I do hear that street drugs are completely unregulated, and therefore you don't know what you're buying.
No,
So
that's
you're
true.
in a black market. And it's really black because now you add to all of these things the uncertainty, and we hear about this with fentanyl and all that stuff.
That's right.
You just don't know what you're buying.
No, you don't. And I think there'll be a confidence factor in that, in a person wanting to still continue to purchase from a dispensary, knowing that everything's going to be lab tested. And so there's a lot of positives with legalization also, and that would be one of them. Is it will have a lot, the products will be regulated and they will be lab tested. And I think that's really important. And I think, being in business my whole life, I mean, you understand that you have to have some regulations and some policies. I mean, you run a far more effective business by having such things. And a regulated market is excellent too. Keeps everybody as honest as possible.
The question is the regulations, which is what we're talking about.
It's the regulations. It's, it's definitely leaning to big business.
There's another piece of this that simply hadn't occurred to me. I read that marijuana is going to be legalized July 1st in Canada, and we'll all live happily ever after. And I said, "Oh, that's fine." And then I met you, and life got complicated.
I'm sorry about that, Bill.
That's okay.
Well, it's a nuisance, but I needed to be straightened out. But one of the things that had simply not occurred to me is this is a biological product, which means it is a very complicated product. This is not, add 3 ingredients, shake, and distribute.
Yeah.
And again, going back to the experience of 40 years plus of growers working with the plants, developing various strains and hybrids and all the other things that presumably go on, there is a knowledge, there's a genetic base that has been developed that is nowhere in these plans that I can see. What the federal government is specifying, a rich variety of that, and then the application of that, how does that knowledge of that plant get to the end user, which is presumably part of what your organization and organizations like you do. You know the product, you talk to people who are doing actual growing, the client, you're able to match those up. I would assume that's part of, probably an important part of the business. And the confidence that goes with that, it appears that a lot of that's going to get lost or go underground, which is that same problem.
Yeah. Part of the benefits of having a local store is hand-holding.
Yeah.
And I will say that because we do hold a lot of hands. And that's, I think, what makes us great, because you don't necessarily get that in the medical field. And when our clients come in, they talk to us about what their symptoms are, what they have, and we talk to them about what product would best be suitable for them and how much to take, because we're all made differently and we all metabolize differently. And so we are very ultra conservative for someone because we want to set them up for success and we want this to work for them. And so we spend a lot of time with our clients.
So with the new regulations, that goes away. But what can anybody who's seeing this saying, well, yeah, but I don't like that. What should I do?
That's why we're fighting, Paula.
Well,
That's why we're advocating
Yes.
for this, because, we can still, flower is still like very medicinal. Some of us smoke, some of us don't. And that's, back to the product diversity. I'm a non-smoker, and I would really love it if we had some other options for people like me who are non-smokers. But having said that, flower is an amazing medicinal plant, and it's amazing to utilize in that way. It can create hunger for someone. It can create sleep, a reduction in anxiety or depression. I mean, there's so many medical elements in flower. So at least, we'll have a product or two that can help them. And we can have those discussions for that particular product. It's just the rest will go away.
I want to understand just broadly what we're dealing with. The federal government is close to having passed legislation that establishes the outlines, and what it looks like is a structure that covers a variety of different issues. Who gets to produce it, who gets to distribute it, age classifications, types of products, and some other pieces, and have set what are functionally maximums, which then allow the provinces to, they've set it, for example, an age of 18. BC is aiming for 19 for reasons that...
Yeah, and that's a province.
Which is a provincial decision, but
yes,
what the provinces can do can make it stricter than the federal regulations, but they can't relax the federal regulations. And the kinds of concerns you're expressing are federal level issues. And ultimately...
Well, there are also provincial level issues if you don't want them to make it stronger.
Even if the province does everything the feds say, it still doesn't address the core issues that you're talking about, which is the variety of product, chemically, the product itself, and then the mode of distribution. Is it a tincture? Is it smoked? Is it vaped? Whatever else.
And the source.
Yes. Well, the source, will ultimately be grown by the licensed producers.
I found myself thinking of, we've had a wonderful run of craft breweries in the last 2 decades
Yeah, we sure have.
in the world.
We sure have.
And and I look around British Columbia and look at it in this context, and I found myself thinking craft bud. And the fact is, it would, from looking at the spectrum, and again, particularly with BC's experience, history, there should be, it seems, a place in the marketplace for responsible craft bud.
Yeah.
Which is what, the product you've been distributing for
yes,
years.
Yes, and it would be a huge opportunity for the rural areas to have that. Because, you can have like winery groweries, that sort of a thing. And, part of that cannabis culture is people will come in for tourism and start discovering all these groweries, and where you can go and you can go down and see the gardens, and you can smell the product and taste and flavor the product. And I think that's a huge opportunity for our rural areas.
Variation on stop and smell the roses.
That's right. I love it.
So in terms of the advocacy, I have a sense of urgency in all of this.
There is a sense of urgency, yes.
And yet I still don't know what to do.
What to do.
Well, before you tell me what to do, the challenge is this 5-year dead zone. Essentially, you can't sit with your hands folded for 5 years.
No.
And wait on the offhand chance the federal government will do what I think a lot of people think they should have done at this point. And let me also say, this is not, there is still controversy around it. There's at least one major political party who is apparently very hostile to the whole notion of it. So this is, it's a complex issue, but it seems, from what I'm hearing you say, is that ultimately we're going to have to find ways of dealing with the federal government, dealing at the federal level, and the party in power, and the party that's likely to be in power, the parties that are likely to be in power. How do we do that?
Well, okay, so 2 parts. So once we enter into legalization, from that day that we're legal, 1 year after, they're going to be bringing out what they're considering as edibles. Now, we do not know what consists of edibles. Right now, we the other products that we have are topicals and concentrates and tinctures. And so I don't know. Again, it comes back to the information that's coming down, and we can only sit and wait until it appears. But I'm hoping that if we can advocate properly, and I'll tell you how we can do that in a minute, that we can maybe reduce that 5-year sentence. You know, I understand that there's certain protocols that we have to go through, and it takes time to do that. But let's try for the people to reduce that time frame.
And how do I do that?
How do we do that? Hey, we want to talk to your MLAs and we want to talk to your MPs. And, you know, for product diversity, it's going to be our MP. So that's Wayne Stetsky in our area.
And that's the provincial area wherever one is, and that's true in the whole country, that some things are going to be provincial.
Yeah, and so your MLAs will be your provincial allies, and your MPs will be your federal allies. And also...
Regardless of whose party is in power in that local...
That's right. Exactly. And Wayne Stetsky is a huge advocate, and if you go online, you'll see him representing growers in Parliament and having a very strong statement about it. And so I think, you know, everyone I have spoken to on a local basis in the East Kootenays and the Columbia Valley are very open to understanding how we can all help and how we can create a voice moving forward.
Is this something... It hadn't occurred to me until listening to you. Mm-hmm. The federal government could devolve a lot more responsibility to the provinces. Mm-hmm. BC is an example. BC has a long history. BC has a lot of experience. BC has a lot more knowledge than most, probably any of the other provinces or territories. The federal government could decide that to allow more local autonomy in how the products are grown, distributed, presented, supported, whatever. Mm-hmm. That is one option. And rather than having the federal government could assign the responsibility rather than retaining the responsibility and trying to make general rules for the entire country.
Yeah, right now it's kind of like a monopoly. I mean, they're controlling all the distribution and all the sale of the cannabis and the growing of it. What we hope to change is the framework that the craft growers can work within. And ultimately what we'd like is for the craft growers to obtain a license to grow and to sell, and to be able to sell to the local retailers like our store. And
rather than going through this very long
distribution loop. Yes, because
which is what you're doing now,
right? And again, back to we have a very small population, and the only way that we can stay open is to have a certain profit margin and to have volume. Mm-hmm. And if we can bypass the distribution, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be regulated, it has to be regulated. But to have the same situation as the craft growers or the craft beer industry or wine industry, where they can grow it, they can sell it, and they can sell it to the restaurants and whoever else they want to sell it to or market it to.
So with the time frame being somewhat pressing, give me the 3 things I'm supposed to do tomorrow or this afternoon. I'm supposed to be in touch with my provincial minister and with my federal minister, member of parliament. And am I supposed to be on the internet? Am I supposed to be writing letters? Am I supposed to be making phone calls or talking to my neighbors?
Yes. Well, writing letters is amazing. I mean, as many letters as we can write, and they don't have to be lengthy. We just need our points. We need product diversity for medical patients, whether they want to call it medical or recreational. We need it. We need product diversity, and we need to incorporate our local craft growers and producers.
That's pretty straightforward.
It's really straightforward.
My experience in legislative processes is that the elected official is dependent on a lot of other people to lead, direct, guide, enforce the decision-making process. I haven't looked at this enough, and it may not just simply not be obvious, and you may not know. How much of this is coming out of the minds and imaginations and the machinations of the Canadian Parliament, how much is coming from staff input to the Parliament, how much is coming from other governmental agencies. Health Canada is an obvious example, and I assume there are others.
And how much is coming from lobbyists?
How much of it is coming from lobbyists? Where are the pressure points in this? Because if we really want to have an effect, it's all well and good to send letters, but you need to find pressure points. And sometimes being nice is the best way to do it, and sometimes being, how to say, direct is an effective way to do it. Do we know enough about the flow of knowledge? I know there were lots of meetings, there were lots of consultations, there were lots of public input. Certainly in BC, and I assume in other provinces, and I assume at the federal level. But do we have a sense of what the pressure points are in this, the nodes that we should be looking at and addressing?
Well, there's a lot of spokes in the wheel, and I think we definitely have a sense of what's coming down. And so, in my opinion, now we have to take from the lower levels and work up. And I'm doing that by creating conversations with the mayors in both regions, the East Kootenays and the Columbia Valley. I'm talking to our MLAs and our MPs, and trying to create some conversation on these key points.
CAMCD.ca. Oh.
Yeah. And so we are now also utilizing the Chamber of Commerce because they are an advocate for small business, and we've sent some policy changes up through them to go to our BC chamber. So we're currently working on that, and we're also connecting others in the West Kootenays and speaking with them. And our intention there is actually for this chamber here in Kimberley to contact all of the chambers in BC and have a brief conversation with them about where they sit and how they can help advocate for the small business, because that's what they do.
And ultimately, you're talking about business.
I'm talking about business, and it's been an amazing experience advocating or lobbying on behalf of the community and behalf of our members. And I'm really happy to see that there's a lot of open minds out there that actually do want to have this discussion and are willing to help.
Thank you so much, Laurie Weitzel.
Oh, thank you, Paula. Thank you, Bill.